If a person is negatively affecting your walk with Christ, such as encouraging you to sin or disrespecting your beliefs, this is a sign that God doesn't want you to be with that person. I'm James. My own search for meaning and purpose began when I was feeling lost, longing for a deeper connection with life. On that journey, I learned that there is immense value in sharing experiences and learning from others. Now, I'm here to invite you to join this spiritual adventure. If there's an inner voice telling you that there's more to life than the daily grind, join me and subscribe to our channel. When you're on a solid spiritual journey, it's important to surround yourself with people who respect and support your faith. If someone is encouraging you to do things that go against Christ's teachings, this is a clear sign that this person is not aligned with God's will for your life. Perhaps you have a friend or even a partner who constantly disrespects your beliefs, making jokes about your faith or trying to convince you to take part in activities that you know are not right. This kind of negative influence can weaken your relationship with God and distract you from what really matters. I've been there myself. There was a person in my life who constantly put me in situations that challenged my Christian values. At first, I ignored the signs and thought that I could change this person or that they would understand my beliefs over time. However, I realized that my spirituality was slowly being eroded. It was a difficult time, but I understood that God didn't want me to be in that relationship. When I walked away, my faith grew stronger, and my connection with God became deeper. When God warns you repeatedly about a person, and you don't listen, you may find that God's peace disappears from your life. This is because you are ignoring God's instructions. God's peace is one of the greatest gifts we can receive on our spiritual journey. When we are aligned with God's will, we feel a tranquility and comfort that is inexplicable. However, when we ignore God's warnings about a person or situation, this peace can disappear. You may begin to feel a constant nagging, an anxiety that seems to have no clear origin. This is God trying to draw your attention to something that isn't right. Imagine that you are in a relationship where you constantly feel that something is wrong. You pray, you seek guidance, but the restlessness persists. This is a clear sign that God is trying to warn you. I've been there too. There was a person in my life who, despite looking good on the outside, left me with a constant feeling of unease. For a long time, I ignored these feelings, thinking that it was just a phase or that I was being too critical. However, when I finally decided to listen to God's voice and move away from this person, peace returned to my life in a way that I hadn't felt for a long time. It's crucial to pay attention to these signs. God always guides us to the best path, but it's up to us to listen and act according to His will. Ignoring these warnings can lead to negative consequences, not only spiritual but also emotional and physical. So if you feel that God's peace is absent in your relationship, perhaps it's time to reevaluate and listen to what He's trying to tell you. Do you feel that God's peace is disappearing from your life? Perhaps it's time to reevaluate and listen to the divine signs. Align your life with God's will and gain the peace you deserve. In our guide, 21-Day Spiritual Challenge, Develop Your Intuition and Conquer Your Dreams, you'll find tools and practices to connect deeply with your intuition and live in harmony with God's will. Don't miss this opportunity to transform your spiritual life. Click on the link in the comment above to start your journey now. Negative consequences. Ignoring God's warnings can result in bad things happening. God may allow these difficulties to occur so that you finally get away from the harmful person. When we choose not to listen to God's warnings, the consequences can be quite severe. I'm not talking about minor annoyances, but about situations that really shake up our lives. Just imagine, you're in a relationship or friendship that isn't going well, and even though you see the signs, you insist on continuing. God, in His infinite wisdom, often warns us in subtle ways and sometimes in more direct ways. He can use people, situations, or even a feeling in our hearts to warn us. Now, if we ignore these signs, the tendency is for things to start going wrong. You've probably been through something like this or know someone who has. Financial problems, constant arguments, a feeling of always being tired and discouraged. These difficulties are no coincidence. They are God's way of showing us that we are on the wrong path. He allows these things to happen so that we wake up and realize that we need to get away from that person. For example, you may be in a romantic relationship that, deep down, you know isn't right. Fights are frequent, trust is broken, and yet you continue. God may allow something more serious to happen so that you take action. It could be a betrayal, a big lie, or even a health problem. These situations are painful, but they are also opportunities for change. I've seen a lot of people go through this myself. Some people can spot the signs right away and make the decision to walk away. Others, unfortunately, have to go through very difficult situations to finally understand God's message. God doesn't want to see anyone suffer, but He also knows that sometimes pain is necessary for growth and change. Putting someone above God is a sign of idolatry. If a person becomes more important to you than God, this is a clear sign that the relationship is unhealthy. Idolatry is a theme that appears a lot in the Bible, and we often think that it only refers to worshiping images or stone idols. But the truth is that anything or anyone we put above God can become a form of idolatry. And this is especially dangerous in relationships. When you put someone on a pedestal, giving them more importance than God, you're entering tricky terrain. God must always be the top priority in our lives. He is the source of everything we need. When we put someone above God, we are saying, even if unconsciously, that this person is more important than our relationship with Him. I remember a story of a friend who was so involved with his girlfriend that he started missing services, stopped reading the Bible, and even stopped praying. He was so focused on the relationship that he forgot about his spiritual walk. And that, my friends, is a big mistake. God should be the center of our lives, and any relationship that takes us away from Him needs to be reevaluated. It's very easy to get lost on this path. Sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. It starts with small concessions, like giving up church activities to spend more time with the person. Then you start to change your values and priorities. The next thing you know, you've put that person above God. Idolatry is dangerous because it diverts us from God's purpose for our lives. He created us to worship and serve Him above all else. And when we allow someone else to take that place, we are compromising our relationship with Him. If you realize that you're more concerned with pleasing someone else than you are with pleasing God, it's time to stop and reflect. God must always come first. If you realize that you're feeding the desires of the flesh more than those of the Spirit because of someone, that's a sign that this person is not good for your spiritual life. When we talk about feeding the desires of the flesh, we're referring to those urges and impulses that lead us away from God's path. These are behaviors and attitudes that, although they may bring momentary satisfaction, end up diverting us from God's purpose. If you find yourself in a relationship where carnal desires are continually stimulated and spiritual growth is left aside, it's a clear warning sign. For example, imagine being in a relationship where the other person constantly encourages you to engage in practices that are not in line with your faith, such as excessive alcohol consumption, sexual immorality, or dishonesty. These behaviors may seem harmless at first glance, but they gradually erode your spirituality and distance you from God. I myself have been in a situation where a close friend started leading me down paths that I knew were not the right ones. It was hard to recognize, but I realized that I was sacrificing my spiritual peace to please someone else. It took a lot of prayer and discernment to realize that this relationship wasn't doing me any good and that I needed to walk away. Therefore, it is essential that we pay attention to the signs. God calls us to a life of holiness and communion with Him. If someone in your life is taking you away from that path, it's time to reevaluate that relationship. Remember Paul's words in Galatians 5, verse 16. But I say, walk in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. A relationship that does not bear good fruit is a sign that it is not blessed by God. Healthy, God-ordained relationships produce good fruit. In Matthew 7, verse 17, Jesus teaches us, so every good tree produces good fruit, and every bad tree produces bad fruit. This principle applies to all areas of our lives, especially our relationships. If a relationship isn't producing healthy fruit, it's an indication that something is wrong. The fruits of a relationship can be diverse: peace, joy, spiritual growth, mutual support, among others. When we are in a relationship blessed by God, these fruits appear naturally. On the other hand, relationships that generate constant stress, sadness, conflict, and distance from God are clear signs that they are not aligned with God's will. Think about how you feel in the presence of this person. Do you feel closer to God? Do you feel that you are growing spiritually? Or, on the contrary, do you feel that you are regressing and moving away from your faith? It's important to make this self-assessment. I remember a time when I was in a business partnership that started well, but over time I realized that the relationship was bringing more anxiety and disagreements than benefits. The decisions made in this partnership often went against my Christian principles. As I prayed and reflected, I realized that God was showing me that the relationship was not fruitful and that I needed to take action. So, if you find yourself in a relationship that isn't bearing good fruit, don't ignore the signs. God calls us to live in harmony and peace, and He wants our relationships to reflect His love and goodness. Evaluate, pray, and seek discernment so that your relationships are always a reflection of God's will. If you feel you have to force a relationship to make it work, it's a sign that God is not behind it. Divinely ordained relationships flow organically and naturally. When we talk about forcing a relationship, we are referring to the constant and exhausting effort to maintain a connection that should, in essence, be natural and fluid. In the spiritual context, a relationship that requires this kind of incessant effort can be a clear indication that it is not blessed by God. Imagine a river that flows smoothly and naturally without obstruction. That's the kind of flow you expect in a relationship aligned with God's will. When you find yourself constantly fighting against the current, trying to make the relationship work, it's as if you're trying to divert the course of that river. The nature of the relationship becomes artificial and forced, which indicates that you may be going against God's plan for your life. I've been there, and I know how difficult it is. You invest time, energy, and emotions, hoping that things will get better. But the truth is that if God isn't blessing the union, the problems will persist. More than that, these forced relationships can take us away from our spiritual purposes. Instead of bringing us peace and growth, they bring stress and frustration. So if you're trying too hard to keep someone in your life, perhaps it's time to reflect and seek divine guidance. God wants us to have relationships that build us up, that flow lightly, and that bring us closer to Him. Forcing yourself into a relationship can be a clear sign that this is not the path He has mapped out for you. In some cases, especially with family members, it may be necessary to love these people from a distance in order to keep your own peace and spiritual walk intact. Loving from a distance is a concept that may seem contradictory at first glance, especially when we think of family relationships. However, it is a practice that is sometimes necessary in order to preserve our inner peace and spiritual journey. When we live closely with people who in some way harm our emotional and spiritual well-being, it can be an act of love for ourselves and even for these people to keep a certain distance. The Bible teaches us to love our neighbor as ourselves, but that doesn't mean we should allow toxic or harmful behavior to invade our sacred space. Loving from a distance is not synonymous with abandonment or indifference. It's a way of protecting yourself and, at the same time, respecting the boundaries of others. I remember a time when I had to make this difficult decision with a member of my family. It was painful, but necessary. Keeping a certain distance allowed me to continue on my spiritual path without the constant interruptions that undermined my peace. And, paradoxically, it also helped the other person, as our daily coexistence was becoming detrimental to both of us. Loving from a distance can include limiting the time we spend together, avoiding unnecessary arguments, and focusing on maintaining respectful communication, even if it's more sporadic. It's important to remember that this decision must be made with discernment and prayer, asking God for guidance on how to act in a fair and loving way. In short, to love from a distance is to recognize that sometimes the best way to take care of ourselves and others is to respect healthy boundaries. This preserves our peace and allows us to continue our spiritual journey in a more peaceful and focused way.